Hi Mama, you're listening to the Mama podcast. My name is Sumaya and I'm the co-founder of Mama Emmy app. I'll be your host today. Mama Emmy is a platform dedicated to connecting mums and mums-to-be where you can meet like-minded mamas and create lifelong friendships. Connecting Mamas is all about empowering women, and we continue this mission with this podcast. In our very first episode, I am joined by my very good friend Annam Salim. We talk all things pregnancy, birth, labour, and how I gave birth in an Uber. So let's get stuck in. Annam has 2 children. She has a son who's nearly 5 and a daughter who's nearly 2. Might as well start from the beginning.
Yes, okay. So pregnancy with my son, I'll be honest, it was not the most enjoyable experience. Now, the first, I'd say 16 weeks, I was actually pretty sick. So, I mean, look, I'm sorry for all the information, but vomiting about 2-3 times a day, feeling nauseous. I just was generally very, very miserable. So all those stories of mothers glowing and really enjoying their pregnancy, they just seemed really, really far away from how I was. I managed to get through eating lots of crackers and finding comfort that morning sickness was actually very, very common. I wouldn't call it morning sickness though. It was more like all day sickness. So people who say morning sickness is a lie. It was tough. I was working full time as a dentist and sort of juggling a very, very busy schedule and feeling tired and sick was something that I did really struggle with. But around 16 weeks, I began to feel much, much better. And I was actually getting very, very excited to have my baby. So I was in full nesting force, sorting out lots of things, lots of shopping, really excited, thinking about baby names, all the things that you sort of can think are the nice parts basically of having a baby. There was a lot I didn't know. So I spoke to other mums. I read books, I took leisurely naps, which are a thing of the past. And yeah, so I pretty much thought I knew everything. I went to all my antenatal classes, read lots of things online, and I thought, yeah, this will be fine. I'll be absolutely great. And then, yeah, and then the birth story.
So, when you did suffer from the sickness, did that make you feel really low in mood, or was it just kind of something you knew that you just had to get through?
I think for the first sort of few weeks, I saw it as something just to get through, and I was still very much excited about being pregnant. But as the weeks went on and it wasn't really easing, I did start to feel very low because it really impacted my lifestyle completely. You're not just working, but even just going out, socializing with friends, going for meals, all of these things became somewhat of a challenge because I was quite scared of actually being sick. I can recall times where I vomited in my car. Sometimes it was so spontaneous that I wasn't really ready for it. I vomited at work, even in a car park of a shop. It sounds pretty awful. I'm just blessed though that it didn't get to the level where it was actually hyperemesis, where it was so bad that I had to go to hospital. I managed to just about avoid that.
And so I guess that is a challenge in itself, which, I mean, my pregnancy was completely different to yours, and I didn't have many pregnancy symptoms as such. I mean, I had the sort of tiredness in the first trimester and a little bit of heartburn towards the end of pregnancy. But for even someone like me who has experienced pregnancy, that's quite interesting to hear, because I can't truly relate because it's not something I actually experienced, but I think it will be comforting for other mums to hear that actually this is, normal in inverted commas, I guess, because as much as it's normal, it's okay to feel low, and that's how people will feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
some people may experience that.
Yeah, I think, like you were very blessed to have a good pregnancy. And I think that, that shows that there is a positive side, and many, many people, they will actually be fine. But I think we need to recognize the other side, that some people don't enjoy their pregnancies, or they may not enjoy a certain part, and then they begin to to feel more comfortable with it. And that's okay, because, we all experience things in different ways and have different perceptions of how things are.
Yeah, absolutely. At least it eased up for you after 16 weeks and it did get better. Was that the same with your daughter too?
Yeah, interestingly, I would say that the pregnancies were pretty similar. I think second time round, it was, I would say maybe I was very, very mildly less sick, although it could have just been that I was so busy running around after my 2-year-old that I wasn't really paying as much attention on my pregnancy as I did with my first. Because, when you've got ample time and you just sort of, with your first, you concentrate on every little thing. You look at your app and you see, and this many weeks and this many days. With my second pregnancy, I was so busy, the weeks just sort of passed me by. So in a way, the second one was easier, but also it was a little bit more tough just because I was juggling things.
I've met people that have had different pregnancies with 2 different children.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting that yours were pretty similar.
The only thing I would say that was different, I felt like my cravings were a bit different. Interestingly, they fit quite a lot with the sort of the stories that people tell you. So when I was pregnant with my son, I really, really loved salt and vinegar crisps and ready salted crisps. Like, I just loved that kind of thing. And I went through many, many. And then with my daughter, I really, really like sweet things. So I was having lots of juices and these little strawberry sweets that I used to get, and they used to really help my sickness, but I just really liked the sweetness. I don't know whether there's a scientific backing to these different cravings with a different gender, but for me, absolutely, I felt that.
So it's quite interesting you say that, because my cravings were completely different, and I felt that my cravings were potentially my body wanting a certain nutrient.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, again, whether there's some scientific backing to this, but early pregnancy, I used to, I would crave milk. And then mid-pregnancy, that sort of turned into oranges, where I thought my body may need vitamin C. And then later into pregnancy, that turned into potatoes and chips specifically. I thought it was because my body was growing and it needed the carbs. And so I felt like it was potentially my body needing.
It could be.
Quite interesting that everyone's cravings are so different, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's I think milk is a very common one, actually. Even I went through lots of milk. I think I found that it helped with my heartburn as well. I think one thing that I do want to point out as well is that with my pregnancies, both of them, I know how most people want to sort of wait until after 12 weeks to tell people. And that was my plan. But with me being so sick, I did not have a choice. I had to tell my work and I had to tell my family and friends, because it was very obvious that something was different. And also I needed that support. I think this wait till after 12 weeks because it's more of a sort of a safer time, and I completely understand that. But at the same time, I think if you need support and you need to tell people, then tell them, because being isolated and feeling miserable are sort of the 2 worst things you can put together. And when I told people, I got lots of support, and my colleagues at work were great. They were checking in on me, bringing me cups of milk, and it was very, very nice. So I think sharing sometimes is the best way to go if you need help.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember calling you literally after I did my pregnancy test.
I remember.
For me, it was nice to have the support from very, very early on.
Yeah, definitely. And we spoke about our pregnancies and trying to work out, is this normal? Is this not normal? Just like any bunch of friends and all, sisters would do.
Yeah, exactly. Part of the reason why we did this podcast, because we want everyone to feel that they've got someone to listen to. I mean, I listened to a lot of podcasts throughout my pregnancy, and even now I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts. And I just feel like when I'm listening, it's like you're having a chat with somebody.
Yeah, definitely. That's my pregnancies talked about. So how was yours, Samaya?
So mine was pretty different in that I didn't, like I mentioned earlier, I didn't really have many symptoms as such, which luckily that meant that my life didn't change drastically. I have a huge interest in wellness and fitness. And so I continued working out throughout my whole pregnancy. That involved weight training, and I pretty much did weight train towards the end. So a few weeks before I was due to give birth is when I actually stopped working out in terms of weight training. And I did take up prenatal yoga as well, which I have continued yoga since I've given birth. And like I fell in love with yoga during pregnancy. Towards the end of labor, that sort of transitioned to walking lots. So because I was so into fitness and I knew the advantage of how walking would help labor and naturally induce labor as well, I was walking sort of 3 or 4 miles a day.
Wow.
Leading up to the labor, but I mean, at the time I was like, I'd taken my leave from work at that point, so I had a bit more free time. I would put my hypnobirthing tracks on my phone, headphones would be on, and I'd be off on my way for like a 3 to 4 mile walk every single day.
That's great.
And I mean, I was in London at the time, so the weather was really nice. It was a really nice time to be sort of enjoying the pregnancy, and luckily I didn't have many symptoms. I was pretty small in terms of my pregnancy and how much I was carrying. So I know some people struggle towards the end of pregnancy where they get like swollen feet, or they've put on quite a bit of weight and the weight holds them down. But luckily, I mean, I'm really blessed and really grateful that my pregnancy was pretty straightforward and I could walk all the way to the end.
That's great. You know, the fact that you could carry on with your fitness and you stayed very active, I think that is great for your body and for your mind. And I think the hypnobirthing sounds very interesting. So I think that's something we should definitely touch on a later podcast, because I'd like to hear all about it.
Yes, definitely. I think that's a big topic in itself. So it'll be good to sort of chat about that at some point. That, I guess, leads us on to labour. And
yes.
Do you want to sort of touch on your labour? Tell me how is it different with the two? It'll be really interesting to hear, actually.
Okay, so with my son, I went into labour when I was 39 weeks and 4 days. So I was due, it was sort of middle of May. The weather was gorgeous. I was going for long walks basically every day as much as I could. And the day before I went into labour, me and my husband went for a long walk just around our area. I was trying to sort of get my labour started, because, you know, you sort of read these things where the things you should do to try and start labour, and I was getting quite tired and very big, so I thought the sooner this baby comes the better. So we went for a long walk, and then the next morning around 5 a.m. I woke up and I was having contractions, and they were I was quite confused as to whether, like, what was going on, as in I thought it was contractions, but obviously until you've had one you don't really know if it's even a contraction, right? So I waited, like, I lay in bed for like a bit longer, and then another one came. Then I woke my husband.
Were you timing them?
No, not initially. I was just lying down trying to figure out like what's going on, because I'd had sort of Braxton Hicks, so, you know, the sort of the fake contractions before. So I thought, is it just them? And I was sort of half asleep as well. So it was a very strange morning. And then as they got worse, I woke my husband up, and he sort of, obviously the men are more clueless than us, really. I mean, they can't feel anything, so they don't know. And then I rang the hospital. I told them, and then they just said to me just to hang on. They said try a warm bath, etc. And then I felt like my waters had broken, but again I wasn't sure. So I rang them again, and they just said, okay, if that's what you feel, then come in.
Right.
Because of course, you know, they don't want it to be too long until, like, from the birth until your water's breaking. So we went in, and I remember when my husband was driving in the car, I think it was rush hour. It was about 7:30. And, you know, there was a bit of traffic, and I was moaning in the car, and I was like saying, hurry up. And he was like, going as fast as I can. And then we got to the hospital, and when we got there, they checked me and everything, and they said that I was around 3 centimeters. So they said, you can either stay or you can go home. So I just decided to stay.
Right.
And then pretty much the labour progressed very well and quite quickly. I had said initially that I didn't want an epidural, and I'd made it quite clear because I had a birth plan. However, when it got to a certain point, I was asking for one. Well, I say asking, but I think I mean shouting for one. And unfortunately, or fortunately, things were moving very fast, so they couldn't give me an epidural. I was in the water for most of the labour, and it was nice in terms of it did help me, but I chose to give birth out of the water on a bed. Right. I just felt more secure and more comfortable doing so. Everything went well, and he was a lovely, healthy baby, 7 pounds 8. And yeah, that's it really. I mean, I think until you actually go through that experience yourself, it's very hard to relate. I did have my husband and, you know, my family support, and they were great as well. And I think the first few days of motherhood, they are a haze, and you are somewhat, you feel like you're in a dream, you know, all the days are rolling into one, but ultimately, you know, it's a great blessing, and everything was fine.
So with your second baby, it was different, and with your daughter, you had to have a C-section.
Yes.
And that's because she was breech, right?
Yes. So she chose not to turn around. Quite stubbornly, which she's still quite stubborn. And so she was breech presentation, and they gave me options in hospital. They said that we could try to turn her around, or we could just book you in for an elective C-section. I sort of put it in the doctor's hands, and I said, well, you know, you decide what's the best thing to do. So the consultant said that he actually preferred not to try and turn her around, and said a C-section would be the best way to go. So, you know, they're the experts, so I said that's fine. So we were booked in, and interestingly, it was when I was 39 weeks and 4 days, exactly like my son, when I had the C-section booked for. And again, it went well, you know, very surreal, a different experience, quite clinical. And, you know, being a dentist, I do have some knowledge of surgical things, what they were saying, and things like that. So it was very interesting. And, you know, they were great. They were a lovely, great team of midwives and obstetricians, and everything went well. And yeah, so my daughter was born 7 pound 2, and it was a very, very surreal experience. So having experienced both ways of you know, having a child, giving birth, I think they are very, very different, and there's actually pros and cons to both. But either way, you know, they're both very safe, and you get to meet your baby at the end.
Yeah. And so with your C-section, did you have skin-to-skin contact with your daughter?
Yes.
Pretty much immediately after?
Yes.
And did you opt for delayed cord cutting for either of them?
Do you know what? No, I didn't. I'll be honest, I didn't. But with my son, I didn't really know much about it back then.
And you were 26?
Yes, so I was 26 when I had my son, and I was 29 when I had my daughter. So with my son, I didn't really know much about it. And then with my daughter, it was something that I was thinking about. But, you know, with the whole procedure of the C-section and everything going on, I just sort of was just happy for them just to do the way that they wanted to do it. It wasn't like a major thing for me. Looking back, perhaps I should have given it more thought. If in the future I choose to have another one, then something I may consider.
That's amazing. I was just curious. I just wondered whether you'd done it with either. Even I didn't know that detail.
So now that you know about mine, Sumaya, I think we need to tell everyone about yours, because your story is very interesting and something which made me very, very shocked and surprised. And even to this day, when I hear your story, like, I learn new details and I still can't believe it. So go on.
Do you remember receiving the text message when I sent you to say that?
I was sat in John Lewis with my mum and my son and baby daughter. She was only like, I think 4 or 5 weeks old.
Yes,
and yeah, we were having lunch, and you text me, and literally I just put my knife and fork down, and I just was reading my phone. Yeah, I think you need to tell everyone. Everyone needs to hear this.
So I know you'll remember that at the time I was doing my postgraduate degree in dentistry, and so I actually had an exam which was 3 days before my due date. Luckily, my daughter did hold off, and she waited till the day after the exam to actually arrive. But I hadn't felt anything till this point. I'm not aware of any contractions. Maybe my body was having contractions, but I wasn't really aware. Now looking back and in hindsight, I think, oh, maybe like that tightening that I felt was probably a contraction. But at the time, it was nothing to stop me in my tracks. You know, I was going on about my day as normal, and there was nothing that was happening in my body that would stop me. And I would think, oh, that's something that I should be aware of. And then so on the day that she was actually born, which was 2 days before my due date, I woke up in the morning as normal. This was around 7 a.m. And then I had a show. So I called the maternity department, as you do, spoke to a midwife, and she said, you won't feel anything now for a while. It may be days before you go into labor. So I had my breakfast because I wasn't expecting anything to happen. I didn't have any contractions at this point. It was just a show. Yeah. So I had toast, avocado, eggs, like my favorite breakfast.
Very healthy.
Had a podcast. I was listening to Happy Babies, Happy Births. And I carried on like with my day as I would, but this is like in a span, I'm talking about 10 minutes span. Like this wasn't a long time frame. And then 10 minutes later, I felt something like tightening, quite intense tightening. I woke up my husband because he was still asleep at this point. And at this stage, I still didn't know I was in labor. Like I just felt some tightening. And I thought this was my first contraction. It's going to take days before I give birth. You know, there's like going to be a gap. And this might be, I might not feel anything for a while. But I did, like pretty soon after I felt another tightening. At this point though, neither of us had realized what was going on. So we weren't timing anything. And at this stage, I don't think we really knew that there were contractions.
Yeah.
Right, like we knew that I was in pain, or like it was uncomfortable. I don't like to use the word pain, but like it was uncomfortable. But like we didn't know I was in labor. I so I started the shower thinking I'll go in the shower, it'll help with the discomfort. My husband got dressed and they just kept coming. Like I never actually ended up getting into the shower because they just kept coming and coming. And at this, like we were still like very bad at timing our contractions. So I would time one, my husband would time one, then we'd miss one, but they were happening. Like now thinking back, it was obviously because they were happening so quickly that we were rushing around to get things together, that we didn't realize that they were happening so close together.
So at what point did you think, okay, I need to go?
So this was like 7:10. I probably woke him around 7:10, 7:15. At 7:30, we called our doula because we had a doula book that was supposed to like sort of guide me, like help me through pregnancy, labor, sorry. And when my husband called her, she later told me it's because she heard me in the background, but she told him that we shouldn't wait around and we should get to the hospital straight away. So she even said, don't call the midwife.
Do you want to just run through what a doula is for any listeners that might not know?
So a doula is somebody that can support you through prenatal, postnatal, and labor. So they're not clinically trained, but they are there for emotional and support. They're just there for support. They don't do any of the medical stuff. They're just there to support you through your labor. And I guess it comes hand in hand with hypnobirthing.
Okay.
I mean, you can have a doula without the hypnobirthing, but I felt after I did the hypnobirthing that I would like a doula as well. We don't live close to my family or my husband's family at the time. We weren't close to either of our families. And so we didn't really have much support other than just having each other. So we opted to have a doula. So she advised us to go straight to the hospital. So my husband ordered an Uber at this point.
Okay.
And that's when, I mean, I don't know how long it took the Uber to arrive. I wasn't really paying much attention, to be honest. I did make him, though, put my TENS machine on before we left. And I also changed into my labor dress because I had a labor dress planned. We picked up my bag, my hospital bag, which was packed from like the week before. But we forgot my daughter's medical notes. Which he had to come back and collect after all like the whole sort of process of labor happened, because we didn't have medical notes when we got to the hospital. We left for the hospital when the Uber arrived. We were in the car from that point on. In the car, however, it was pretty early in the morning. So rush hour traffic in London is pretty intense. And so it did take us much longer to get to the hospital than what we'd originally planned. And I was progressing really quickly. Mm-hmm. And so I had my hypnobirthing tracks on, which I'd put on from the morning. So they were still going. I was in the back of the taxi, sort of my arms and my upper body rested against the car door. And then so I was pretty much on all fours. And then my husband was kind of like leaving me to get through the surges, because I think at the time, like now thinking back, the hypnobirthing really helped get through the contractions. Mm-hmm. Suddenly I just felt like the head. And it's strange until you go through labor. Now, I mean, you've been through natural labor, so you know what I mean when like you can feel the head, yes, right?
Yes.
Like you can feel the baby coming. I said to him there, she's coming. I can feel the baby coming. And so he looked and he could see the top of the head.
Wow.
So the next contraction came, and so the head was delivered. My husband held the head. And then I remember, it's so strange that I remember this really sort of, the conversation so clear to me, even to this day, where he said, push the rest of her out. I had to remind him that the antenatal classes taught us to wait for contractions before you push.
Yes.
So I said to him, we have to wait for the next contraction. When the next contraction comes, I pushed, and then so she actually arrived a couple of minutes away from the hospital, so on Waterloo Bridge Road, which is literally the road that turns into the main hospital car park. So we were literally around the corner.
So, before we get to the bit where you actually arrive, just tell me, like, what was the Uber driver doing? Like, what? I can't even imagine. Like, what did he say?
I mean, I don't remember him saying much. I do remember at one point throughout the journey, like before I gave birth, I heard his voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember asking my husband later that I thought he was on the phone to somebody, but because you're so like involved in what's going on in your body, I didn't really pay attention. But it's just so happened he was actually praying.
Oh.
So he must have been quite like shocked. So yeah, I mean, he's lovely, and we're still in touch with him, and I think he was really happy. He felt like it was a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, he was probably quite surprised and shocked, and he carried on driving. We spoke to his wife afterwards, and yeah, so it was a nice, I think it was a nice experience for him because he felt part of it.
Oh, that's amazing. So then when you pulled up to the hospital, like, how did you get out of the car? How did you get into the hospital?
So, I mean, living in London, like the London hospitals are sort of tower blocks. I was still like baby in my husband's hand, umbilical cord still attached, placenta still inside. So there's no way I was walking through the hospital. So I had to actually convince the driver to take me to A&E. So we managed to get to the A&E entrance. There was a paramedic stood outside. So my husband went and sort of spoke to the paramedic. It was like a movie scene in my head. He was smoking a cigarette and he threw the cigarette to the floor and like ran inside the hospital. And then he came back out with the doctor and a couple of nurses and a stretcher. And then when I then got taken into the hospital, into a bed, they checked me, checked my daughter, and then the cord was cut and I gave birth to the placenta after.
Wow. Well, at least, everything ended well. That is an amazing birth story, and it would be interesting to hear if anyone else has had any experiences like that. But I'm just glad that everything worked out well and you and baby are safe.
Yeah, and I think at the time it doesn't cross your mind, and you kind of just let your body and your instincts just do what it needs to. But we're really lucky that she was healthy and we had no complications. And yeah, like you mentioned, it would be really interesting to hear other people's stories to see if anybody else has had something similar. I'm sure somebody else has given birth in a car.
Yeah, or an aeroplane, like somewhere, like traveling.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So it'll be so interesting to hear. So yeah, if anybody wants to share their story, if you're a listener and you want to share a story with us, then yeah, get in contact. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, brilliant.
So I guess that leaves us with the end of this episode, right, Annam?
Yeah.
Because we just wanted to share a little bit of how we got to becoming mothers and how many children we have and a little bit about ourselves.
I hope you have all enjoyed it. I'm sure that there are many, many things that people can relate to, things that they like were similar, things that were different. The two stories of my two births and Sumaya's story, all three of them are different. It just goes to show there's so much variation. There's not really a normal, which is quite comforting.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think if one thing that I can give in terms of advice to any mother or pregnant woman that's due to give birth is have your birth preferences, be prepared, because obviously that makes you feel comfortable and secure because you'll feel prepared. But be flexible,
yes,
because there's no way of knowing really where labor is going to take you.
Yes, I think if you have preferences as opposed to an actual rigid birth plan, you are more likely to be sort of happier with the outcome, because things don't always go as they are planned. Sometimes what we think is a good idea is perhaps not one at the time. And I think it's important to trust in the medical professionals that are looking after you, because this is their job. They know a lot more than us in terms of all these things. And yeah, there is mama instinct as well. If there's anything that you feel that you have to say or tell them, absolutely, you make your preferences and thoughts known. But the main thing is just making sure that you and baby are safe and everybody's happy.
Yeah, exactly. Realistic expectations, I think. And that follows through with motherhood as well, because I think it's so easy to get caught up in what we think should be the right way.
Yes.
But actually, your expectation may be unrealistic.
Yeah.
And trust in your body, I guess, Annam, as well. Like, because I think we hear a lot of negative birth stories. I'm hoping sharing my birth story shows people that actually your body does know what it needs to do. Yeah. We had no medical support.
Women's bodies are amazing, and our bodies are built for this. We we carry the children, we give birth, you know, we have babies. I think it just shows how strong we really are. And let's be honest, if men had to do it, I don't think they could.
I think on that note, we'll call it the end of the episode. And I'm hoping that you all sort of join us again next week, and we'll have a guest with us next time.